10 Themes to Know for Unit 5, the U.S. Congress. Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution created the legislative branch. The Congress was designed to be bicameral, meaning that it has two chambers, a lower house, the House of Representatives, and an upper house, the Senate. This decision was made for three reasons. One, it was a compromise reached between less populated and more populated states at the Constitutional Convention. It forced a more deliberate and slow lawmaking process, and it creates an intra-branch check between the two chambers before a law can be passed. The House and Senate both have different requirements and jurisdictions according to the Constitution. Members of the House serve only a 2-year term and must be at least 25 years old to run. They must be a resident of their district, and they represent only their congressional district. Members of the Senate, however, serve 6-year terms and must be at least 30 years old to run. They have to be 9-year U.S. citizens and residents of their state. Senators represent the entire state that they are elected from. Inside the House, things are much more formal in time because of the large number of members, 435, while the Senate can be a bit more informal and have untimed debates, which allows them for the use of the filibuster. Article 1 of the Constitution specifies different powers for both the House and the Senate. The lower house, the House of Representatives, with its 435 members, is the original place for all revenue bills. This means taxes and borrowing. They also are able to elect the president if no candidate receives the majority of the electoral votes, and they are able to draft impeachment articles against an executive. The upper house, the Senate, with 100 total members, has the ability to confirm all presidential appointments to the judiciary, cabinet, and other regulatory departments. This is also known as the advice and consent power. The Senate is also able to ratify any treaties the President enters into by a 2/3 vote and hold trials for impeached executives. According to the Constitution, some powers are shared by both houses. This includes declaring war, holding oversight hearings, proposing federal amendments, regulating commerce, and using the necessary and proper clause, along with approving the federal budget proposed by the President. Every 10 years, the federal government conducts a U.S. Census to see where the population has moved to help them provide services as well as to reapportion the Congress. Reapportionment is the redistributing of members of the House based on the results of each census. Some states will gain representation, while others that didn't grow nearly as fast may lose representation. In order to reapportion, the state legislature must redraw its district lines in a process known as redistricting, since each member of the House represents one congressional district. Reapportionment does not affect the U.S. Senate, in which every state gets just 2 senators. The state legislatures sometimes use political means when drawing the lines, as they try to give their party an advantage in future elections. This process is known as gerrymandering. Several Supreme Court decisions, including Baker v. Carr and Reynolds v. Sims, have put limitations on gerrymandering, stating that each district must be relatively equal in population size, and that lines cannot be drawn in a way that discriminates racially or religiously. Anyone in the United States has the ability to draft an idea for a bill, but the bill must be formally introduced by an elected member of the House or Senate. After a bill is proposed, it is studied by a series of committees, and if lucky enough, goes out for debate and voted on in each house. However, the majority of bills are killed in committee in a process known as pigeonholing. If a bill makes it far enough, conference committees put members of both the House and Senate together to modify 2 versions of the bill to turn it into one finalized version. If the President should veto the bill that is passed by both houses of Congress, the Constitution calls for an override process in which the Congress can override the President's veto, true of checks and balances, by a 2/3 vote in each house. However, this rarely happens, as the numbers are usually not there to get the override, and it can be a risky political move. Legislators can be influenced by a variety of sources. Perhaps the largest is their political party, which is often the greatest predictor of how they will vote on a bill, particularly in today's polarized party climate. Lobbyists also have a great deal of influence, as they provide vital information on behalf of interest groups. Their colleagues can also have a great deal to do with their ability to pass a bill. The process of log rolling or reciprocity allows them to support each other's bills in return for support on a future bill. It allows them to get things such as riders or earmarks attached to a bill that gives out money that may not be for the general purpose of the bill. Constituents hold a huge influence over legislators, as they have the power to vote them out, and members of Congress have the ability to use casework and pork barrel legislation to get small projects or individualized projects passed to benefit those constituents. There is constantly a struggle for members of Congress on how they should represent their constituents, either as delegates, those who follow the wishes of their constituents, or as trustees who use their own personal judgments and knowledge to serve their people. The President also has a large political voice and a great deal of clout, which can influence the way legislators vote. With 435 members of the House and 100 members of the Senate, committees play a large role in the legislative process. Committees allow each member to have a more specialized focus, as well as to study bills into a much more in-depth version. Standing committees address permanent issues inside of both houses. Each standing committee may have a series of subcommittees that takes a smaller, more fragmented piece and studies it more in depth. When a temporary issue comes up that Congress wants to address in the meantime, a select committee may be created. Conference committees are joint committees that put members of both houses together to help modify past versions of a bill and make them into one finalized version. Inside the House of Representatives, the Rules Committee is the most prominent, which is chaired by the Speaker of the House and sets all of the rules and conditions for each session. The Ways and Means Committee is another very important committee that deals with our tax codes and revenue policies. In the Senate, the Appropriations Committee deals with our spending, while the Foreign Relations Committee studies treaties and possible declarations of war. The political party that a member of either the House or Senate is in plays a large role in their ability to achieve leadership roles in Congress. In the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House is the selected leader of the majority party and presides over each session. Underneath of him is a majority leader who keeps the party organized, and a majority whip who collects all the votes for the party and tries to keep the party unified. The minority party is given a similar structure. In the Senate, the Constitution calls for the Vice President to be the leader of this chamber. However, the Vice President is rarely in attendance and usually only attends when he has to cast a deciding vote in a 50-50 tie. On a daily basis, the majority leader tends to be the leader of the U.S. Senate. Being in the majority party allows you access to the Speaker and Majority Leader roles. It also gives you control of the Rules Committee in the House and allows you to control the legislative agenda, calendar, and flow of legislation. While Congress's main constitutional responsibility is to pass laws, they are at the mercy of the federal bureaucracy to enforce these policies in a meaningful and effective way. Thus, congressional oversight has become a very big factor in recent decades. Some of the ways that Congress checks or oversees the bureaucracy is by holding highly visible media-covered investigative hearings, altering an agency's budget if they feel that that agency is not doing their job up to standard, auditing the agency to see how their money is being spent, drafting articles of impeachment against those who they believe are partaking in corrupt activities, or rewriting legislation to make the enforcement procedures very specific and ironclad. Unlike the President and Vice President, who are selected by the Electoral College, each member of Congress is selected through a direct popular voting system, in which it is a winner-take-all, single-member plurality district. This means that the candidate who receives the most votes becomes the only member of that congressional district to represent them, or the senator who represents the whole state, regardless of if this person even received 50% of the votes. Doing it this way tends to perpetuate the two-party dominated system, since third parties and independents rarely get a high enough percent to be able to have seats in the legislature. Being an incumbent is a huge advantage in Congress, as over 90% of the time House incumbents are re-elected. This is typically because the districts are drawn in very politicized ways, making them either very red or very blue. This often means that primary races for Congress are much more exciting than general races. Some of the advantages of being an incumbent include face recognition, being able to raise more money, having more media access, and being able to provide constituents with work through casework since they already have a seat in the Congress. Free Response Option 1 wants you to reflect on the role that committees play in Congress and the role of party leadership in being able to get bills passed through at a certain pace. Free Response Option 2 deals with why the Congress became bicameral and the varying responsibilities of both the House and Senate.